Okay, one of the more interesting features that we have in Symphonix Evolution is the ability to support external MIDI commands. So you can't see it here at the moment, but I have an Axiom 25 controller linked up to my iPad so that I can actually use that controller to play notes, as you can see. So external MIDI controllers allow the external controller to control the app, and it makes the app very much an extension of the hardware device. Now, to set these up, you go into the settings and go into controllers, and you'll see there's a whole list of functions here that you can support. I've got mine mapped to a Q Nexus controller, but you can actually create your own profiles and add whatever controllers you like. And by controller here I mean the hardware device. I don't mean an individual continuous controller MIDI message. So in the list in the side here you can see a list of all the different commands that Symphonix supports. So for example, pad 1 to 8 are the drum kit pads that we have. So if you had pads on your own keyboard, for example, or an external drum kit, you can map those to the drum kit sounds in Symphonix. We then have a bunch of selections, select tracks 1 to 16, and they're geared so that you can use it in two different ways. You can either create a separate button on an external controller for each track, so you might have a button that allows you to switch from track 1 to track 2 to track 3, or if you want to, you can set up a mode called fader, which we'll get to soon, and if you select one of these tracks and link to a fader, then the control value can select a track. So if you had a knob or a fader slide control, for example, switching the knob around or moving the fader would tell it which track to select. So there's a couple of different options there. Then you have next track, previous track. So you know, typically it's on a hardware device you might have some transport controls for moving to the next track, moving to the previous track. You can connect those transports to these, and we'll show you how to do that shortly. You then have the ability obviously to mute or unmute, solo or unsolo. Then you've got some play, stop, record, step record, start, stop. Arpeggiator controls, so we can come in here, turn it on or off, toggle it. We have some playlist transport controls, so if you set up songs in groups or albums, you can move to the next or previous song within that album, which is very useful. And of course some editing functions, undo, redo, save, load, clear. These are basic things that allow you to connect to hardware buttons. We've got some reset buttons. We had some navigation, move to the previous page, move to the next page. It's very nice to have a page left and page right hardware button on your synth controller. We can also select all the different editing modes, the different pad views or panel views that we have in the app. So if you like, you can have a hardware button that switches to those modes. And then down the bottom here we have some really interesting ones that are very useful. Scroll position and selection position and marker position and playback position. Scroll position allows you to connect a fader or a knob so that when you turn the knob it moves the scroll position on the screen, so you can very quickly shuttle your way through the entire song by connecting it to a fader. Similarly, selection position, it allows you to select a single column. You know how we in the app can select a column in green. It allows you to select that column anywhere in the song very quickly. Marker position is almost the same thing, except it works when you're in step record mode, or if you're recording fingering positions or chord positions. The marker position is the orange line that sometimes appears that tells you where your current position is when you're step recording. So you can link that to a fader and move that very quickly anywhere in the song. Playback position is one of my favourites. That allows you to shuttle the song while it's playing. So if I wanted to effectively emulate a DJ turntable control, I might link that to playback position, and then shuttling the turntable would actually move the song. It's very powerful, great for live performance type work. And go-to marker, in version 2 we introduced the concept of markers in the song, where you could set a defined position, label it and give it a number. With the external MIDI commands, you can connect an external controller to those numbers, so you can transmit the marker number from a controller and then have it go immediately to the controller. And again, that's a DJ function. It allows you to have push buttons that go straight to a part of the song. So you could, for example, have a deck set up where you have your verse 1, verse 2, chord, intro, outro, have all those set up with buttons on the hardware and then jump straight to them. So if I was performing and I'm doing it live, I might want to jump in and do another chorus. I can just go straight there. Extremely powerful stuff. Now, how you use these, of course, is you link them to continuous controllers, or you can also link them to system exclusive messages or any arbitrary message that comes in. We can start with something simple. Let's look at playing. So I go to play pause, and you'll see over here I have linked that to controller number 125 on channel 1, and I've told it to be a switch. And you can actually, with the trigger value, toggle it between fader, switch, or any value from 0 to 127. And how that works is, if it's a specific value, it means that an in-kernel message coming in from the synth has to equal that value precisely in order for it to trigger. Whereas if it's on fader, then it'll assume that the value coming in is a continuous control value. So obviously for things like the scroll positions, that's useful. In the case of a track, MIDI commands can have a value from 0 to 127, and there are 16 tracks. So when you switch a track selection to fader, it effectively divides the value coming in by 8 and then uses that to set a track position. Switch works where you've got an external controller. It might be a DJ controller, or as I've got here, a key Nexus, where you basically have a pad that's got velocity sensitive information on it. So with velocity sensitive, you touch the pad, and while you're holding the pad down, it transmits continuous controller messages. We obviously, for on and off messages like play or stop, we don't want to do that. So what switch does is function as what's called a latch. When the controller is first pressed, it turns it on. It then ignores any subsequent activity until you release it, and then turns it off. So it's very powerful. If you're not using a controller, you can use macro, and what macro does is it flicks to data down the bottom here. The data is hexadecimal MIDI data, raw data, so you can basically say when data is coming in, compare it to whatever values you specify in macro, and if it matches, it'll then transmit the command. Usually for system exclusives. So as an example, let's say that we wanted to set up a button on our controller to be an undo. So I might start by touching the function, so undo. Over here you can see it's not mapped to anything at the moment. If I hit learn now, I can now push the button on the external controller that corresponds to what I want to do. Okay, it's now discovered that, so it's saying, okay, there's going to be something coming in. I'll just say save. Okay, now I release the button, and now it's recorded that value. So now, whenever I push that button, it's going to be like an undo. Okay, so I'm going to press done here, and I should be able to add a note. And now if I push the button on my controller, you can see it did an undo. I didn't have to touch anything on the screen. So it's an extremely powerful tool, being able to link these things up. So as an example, I can now hit the play button. Okay, and it started playing the song. I haven't had to touch the iPad screen. From a performance point of view, I've got it linked up to the arpeggiator function. So for example, I could start playing. Okay, great. But now while I'm playing, I can toggle the arpeggiator function on or off. And turn it off again. So you can see Some of the features in the app, which normally you have to fiddle around with different screens and go back and forward, they're clumsy when you're performing, but when you link it up to an external controller, suddenly you start to unwrap the true value of the app, the ability to manipulate some of these things in real time while you're playing. So it very much changes the app from either a powerful editing tool, because you can put all your editing functions onto your external controller, and you might have a pad where you've linked it up with buttons, but at the same time you might have it set up for performance and quickly go anywhere through the song. Okay, so that's controllers.